0842 local time, Arabian Sea, 80 nautical miles off the Iranian coastline. The AN/SPY-6 radar aboard the USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer assigned to screen the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, painted a contact that did not behave like anything in its threat library. A Shahed 139 reconnaissance drone, Iranian-manufactured, loitering-capable, and ostensibly a known quantity. Except this one wasn't flying a loiter pattern. It was skimming the surface in a deliberate zigzag, then without warning pulled a sustained climb to 15,000 feet, activated its electro-optical and infrared sensor package, and locked a targeting solution onto the Abraham Lincoln's flight deck. 3 radio challenges, no response. The F-35C designated Anvil 1 received the engagement order. An AIM-9X Sidewinder left the rail. The drone came apart in a fireball over the Arabian Sea. The watch officers at 5th Fleet's Combat Operations Center logged it as a minor provocation successfully neutralized and moved on. They had approximately 90 seconds before they understood how wrong that assessment was. The Aegis combat system aboard the Peterson simultaneously registered something that has no clean category in the threat response database. A cascade of hundreds of ghost tracks materializing across the radar picture, spreading outward from the drone's last known position like a contagion. The Shahed had not simply been a drone. In its final seconds, it had deployed a payload of radar-reflective decoys and transmitted a malware burst specifically engineered to flood the Aegis processing architecture with synthetic contacts. 500 false targets, indistinguishable in radar signature from real ones, distributed across a 40-mile radius. The Peterson's operators were suddenly looking at a picture that told them nothing. Every direction was a threat. No direction could be prioritized. At that same moment, the Defense Support Program satellite constellation's infrared sensors registered a thermal event of a different order entirely. 25 silo covers in the Zagros mountain range had opened simultaneously. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was not staging a minor provocation. The drone, the contact they had just shot down with textbook procedure, had been the opening move in a layered, sequenced, and extensively rehearsed trap. And Anvil 1's missile had been the trigger. What was inbound? What had just been set in motion? And could Carrier Strike Group 3 survive what came next? Before the radar picture from the Peterson could be properly interpreted, the sea surface below it became a second problem. Exploiting the window during which the Aegis system was processing through its ghost track overload, 20 Peacock 3 fast attack craft, Iranian-manufactured fiberglass-hulled patrol boats capable of 55 knots, armed with C-802 anti-ship missiles and rocket-propelled grenade systems, launched from camouflage positions along the coastal cliff line and immediately dispersed into a formation designed specifically to defeat fire control systems. They did not run a direct attack profile. They wove into the commercial traffic transiting the Strait of Hormuz, oil tankers, container vessels, bulk carriers, intermixing at close range so that the radar return of each attack craft was geometrically adjacent to vessels whose destruction would constitute an international incident of the first order. The AN/SPY-6, the most capable shipboard radar system ever deployed, was being asked to solve a problem it was not designed for. Distinguishing 55-knot attack boats from slow-moving commercial traffic in a degraded electronic environment in real time, with weapons release authority constrained by rules of engagement that required positive target identification before firing. The IRGC had converted the world's most critical commercial waterway into a human shield, and they had done it in under 3 minutes. The RC-135V Rivet Joint Signals Intelligence aircraft orbiting at altitude over the Gulf of Oman had been collecting throughout the drone's final flight. When its analysts finished decoding the Shahed's last transmission package, the data burst it had sent before Anvil 1's missile reached it. The picture resolved into something far more dangerous than a reconnaissance provocation. The drone's electro-optical lock on the Abraham Lincoln had not been reconnaissance in the conventional sense. It had been terminal targeting data collection. The climb to 15,000 feet had not been evasion. It had been a deliberate atmospheric survey, measuring wind speed, humidity gradients, and air density at the altitude envelope where a ballistic warhead would be maneuvering during its terminal dive phase. Those two datasets, precise GPS coordinates of a moving carrier and a complete atmospheric correction profile, had been formatted into a firing solution and uplinked directly to the inertial navigation systems of land-based Khalij Far's anti-ship ballistic missiles, positioned in hardened silos in the Zagros range. The Khalid Fars is a modified Fateh 110 ballistic missile. Terminal velocity approaching Mach 3, maneuvering warhead, with accurate atmospheric correction, data reducing its circular error probable to under 5 meters, against a carrier strike group whose primary radar was currently drowning in synthetic ghost tracks. Strike Group 3 was caught between a direct attack threat at sea level from fast boats it could not cleanly engage, and a ballistic threat from above that its degraded radar picture could not yet properly track. Suppressing one required weapon and sensor allocation that exposed the other. The IRGC had not just built a trap. They had built a trap specifically calibrated to the Fifth Fleet's defensive doctrine. The Fifth Fleet commander's response to the fast boat swarm was not conventional naval gunfire. It was a decision made under constraint. Hold kinetic fire to prevent commercial vessel casualties and solve the problem with a different tool. A squadron of MH-60R Seahawk helicopters, each armed with advanced precision kill weapon system, laser-guided rockets, launched from the escorting destroyers and positioned directly above the Iranian formation. Firing at steep angles, approximately 70 degrees of depression, the APKWS rockets struck the engine compartments of the PACAP craft, with warheads sized and configured to detonate within the target hull. The fragmentation footprint was contained. The oil tankers 40 meters away registered no impacts. The fast boat threat was eliminated without a single civilian casualty and without a Tomahawk or a standard missile round being removed from the vertical launch cells that needed to be reserved for what was coming from inland. With the surface cleared, the Aegis destroyers could now rotate their radar focus skyward. But before an intercept solution could be computed for the incoming ballistic threat, the strike group needed to sever the IRGC's ability to update the missile guidance systems with real-time target data. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye command aircraft, operating on UHF radar frequencies capable of detecting ground activity at extended range into Iranian territory, ran a triangulation sequence on the control signal the destroyed Shahed had been receiving. The source, a ground control station in a valley near Bandar Abbas. 4 F-35s, each carrying GBU 53/B Stormbreaker small-diameter glide bombs, a 93-pound weapon with a tri-mode seeker combining millimeter-wave radar, infrared imaging, and semi-active laser guidance, were launched from the Lincoln and assigned the ground station as their primary target. Approaching its stealth cruise altitude, they released their weapons at 40 miles distance and turned away before any Iranian radar system had computed a track on them. The Stormbreaker rounds impacted the control station's radar antennas and command vehicles in a sequence that took 11 seconds. Iranian communication traffic from that sector went silent. The American tactical picture reported, "Target destroyed. All systems nominal. Threat communications severed." It was the calm before the second strike, and the silence was exactly what the IRGC had been waiting for. The destroyed control station had been a decoy, not a functional node, a transmitter farm built to produce the electronic signature of a real command center, positioned to attract exactly the kind of precision strike the F-35s had just delivered. Because when an F-35 opens its internal weapons bay to release ordnance, the bay doors expose the aircraft's internal geometry to radar return for several seconds. The aircraft's stealth signature, its defining tactical advantage, is temporarily degraded during the release window. The IRGC's air defense planners knew this. They had built their decoy station specifically to force the F-35s to open their weapons bays in a location where a real air defense battery was already tracking. From limestone caves surrounding the decoy site, camouflaged hatches opened. A Bavar 373 long-range surface-to-air missile battery. Iran's domestically developed successor to the S-300 architecture, equipped with an electronically scanned phased array engagement radar, activated and locked onto the heat signatures of 4 F-35C engines at the moment of weapons release, the precise window of maximum vulnerability. 4 Sayad 4B interceptor missiles launched on railgun acceleration. Mach 6, closing on the F-35 formation from below and behind. No fighter pilot has a good option when a Mach 6 missile is inside 5 miles and accelerating. The 4 pilots of the Black Knight Squadron broke formation simultaneously and executed maximum G evasive maneuvers. 9G sustained turns that compressed the human body to the edge of consciousness, while dispensing flares and chaff in continuous bursts. The sky over the Gulf of Oman became a geometry problem written in fire and aluminum cloud. The F-35s were no longer attacking anything, they were surviving. The strike group could not launch interceptor missiles to support the F-35s. The geometry placed the F-35s and the inbound Shahed missiles on nearly identical bearing lines from the ship's perspective. A standard missile intercept carried an unacceptable fratricide risk. Something else was needed, something faster than a missile. Two EA-18G Growlers, the electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet, unarmed, carrying nothing but sensor and jamming systems, were vectored at maximum speed into the engagement envelope. The Growler's next-generation jammer mid-band system operates on the data link frequencies that carry guidance updates between Iranian ground radar and airborne missile seekers. In the fraction of a second that the Growlers were within range, they injected a spoofed data packet into the Shahed guidance channel. A false position update that told the missile's inertial navigation systems they were on a corrected intercept course, while actually steering them onto coordinates that existed only inside an electronic fiction. On the IRGC radar screens, the missiles appeared to track normally, 4 green icons closing on 4 red icons. In reality, the 4 Shahed 4B rounds curved away from the F-35s and detonated against empty sky. The Iranian operators watched their missiles succeed and destroy nothing. The F-35s were already climbing away. The swarm problem arrived while the strike group's attention was overhead. From container ships anchored in the commercial anchorage area, vessels flagged to Panama, Liberia, and Marshall Islands, indistinguishable on AIS from ordinary cargo carriers, hatches in shipping containers opened simultaneously. Inside each container, pre-positioned and pre-programmed, Shahed 136 loitering munitions, dozens of them rising in a black formation at sea level, flying a preloaded GPS route below 10 meters of altitude, converging on the Abraham Lincoln's port side. The aspect angle with the thinnest close-in defensive coverage. These drones required no radio link, no ground control, no radar guidance update. They flew entirely on stored inertial and GPS navigation. There was nothing to jam in the conventional sense. The Phalanx CIWS systems aboard the Lincoln were rotating and engaging, but the geometry of a simultaneous multi-axis swarm attack is specifically designed to saturate the finite engagement rate of a point defense gun system. The Phalanx fires 4,500 rounds per minute, 75 rounds per second, against targets that can be allocated only one at a time. Against a coordinated swarm, engagement rate is the limiting factor, and the IRGC had counted drones against rounds per second before they launched. The order from the Combat Direction Center was not kinetic. The CXZ Block 3 electronic warfare system, mounted in the command tower of the Lincoln, emitted a high-power microwave pulse, directional, calibrated to the frequency range of commercial GPS chipsets and the microcontroller architecture of the Shahed 136's guidance board. The pulse swept through the swarm formation at the speed of light. The effect on the drone's circuit boards was thermal and immediate. GPS receivers burned out, microcontrollers faulted, navigation processors crashed. Dozens of Shahed 136s lost all guidance simultaneously and pitched nose down into the Arabian Sea, 2 nautical miles short of the carrier's hull. No Phalanx round expended. No standard missile launched. Physics, specifically, directed electromagnetic energy at the right frequency and power density, had converted a swarm of precision weapons into unguided metal falling into salt water. But the silo doors in the Zagros Mountains were still open. The DSP satellite system confirmed. Khalij Far's ballistic missiles were approximately 3 minutes from launch commit. At the range and closing speed of a Mach 3 ballistic weapon, the Aegis intercept solution was geometrically marginal, even with a clear radar picture. Against multiple simultaneous launches, the probability of complete intercept fell below acceptable thresholds. The missiles had to be destroyed underground before they left their silos, and the silos were 50 meters below granite, in hardened bunkers that Tomahawk land attack missiles, designed for surface and near-surface targets, could not reach. The only weapon in the 5th Fleet's available inventory capable of penetrating that overburden was the GBU-72 Advanced 80 kb bunker-busting bomb, a 2.5-ton penetrating weapon, laser-guided, requiring delivery from a platform that could achieve the necessary terminal angle to enter the ventilation shaft that was the only exposed pathway to the ammunition and propellant stores below. 2 F-35s, fuel states critically low from the evasion sequence, airframes carrying fresh radar returns from the Iranian short-range air defense corridor, turned back toward the mountains. They flew the terrain at 100 meters above ground level, using the Zagros ridgelines as radar masking, accelerating to Mach 0.9 in narrow valleys where IRGC observation posts were triggering 23mm cannon fire and shoulder-launched man-pad missiles into the rock faces around them. The terrain warning systems in both cockpits were continuous. The pilots were hand-flying a canyon approach at night, under fire, toward a 5-square-meter ventilation shaft opening on the side of a mountain, while managing fuel states that left no margin for error in the egress. The pop-up maneuver, a sudden climb from valley floor to 3,000 feet, exposed both aircraft to every short-range air defense system within visual range for the seconds needed to achieve a valid release angle. The lead pilot released the GBU-72 at the top of the climb, immediately pushed the nose down and dispensed the remaining flares in a single burst as 2 heat-seeking missiles acquired his exhaust. 3 seconds of freefall for the bomb. 3 seconds of maximum G diving egress for the pilot. The GBU-72 entered the ventilation shaft and detonated inside the propellant storage level. The Zagros Mountains did not produce a missile launch. They produced a seismic event measured at the nearest monitoring stations as a 2.3 magnitude ground tremor, followed by columns of fire and pulverized concrete pushed back up through the silo doors by the pressure wave from the internal detonation. The missiles that were supposed to sink the Abraham Lincoln burned in their silos 50 meters underground. Both F-35s landed aboard the Lincoln with bullet strike damage across their fuselages. Neither pilot was injured. The aircraft would require depot-level maintenance before their next combat sortie. The all-clear was logged at 10:15 hours, 113 minutes after the first radar contact. In Washington, the damage assessment arrived before the pilots had finished their debrief. The operation had succeeded against Site Alpha, the primary ballistic missile facility. Satellite imagery of Site Bravo and Site Charlie, 50 kilometers south, showed silo doors still open and mobile launcher vehicles dispersing into the surrounding terrain, repositioning for a follow-on attack at a time, and from a location the strike group had not yet identified. The IRGC had not been defeated. They had been stopped at Site Alpha on this timeline, with this set of available assets. And in the process of stopping them, the Fifth Fleet had expended or revealed the operational parameters of its most sensitive electronic warfare capabilities. The Growler's spoofing technique, the CXZ high-power microwave system's effective frequency range, the F-35's weapons bay exposure, windowed during ordnance release, all of it was now observable by Iranian signals intelligence and by every foreign intelligence service with a collection asset in the region. Iran had lost a facility and a planned strike. America had stopped it by a margin that left no comfort in the after-action review. The new red dots appearing on the radar screens as the Lincoln's crew stood down from general quarters were not a malfunction. They were a statement. This was not a concluded engagement. It was the end of the opening sequence. The IRGC had demonstrated that the integrated, layered, multi-domain attack architecture they had spent years developing was not a theoretical threat model. It was a combat-capable system that had, for a period of approximately 11 minutes, genuinely threatened a Ford-class carrier strike group with multiple near-simultaneous kill chains. The US had answered every layer: boats with helicopters, missiles with electronic warfare, swarms with directed energy, silos with penetrating munitions. But the answer to each layer had required revealing a capability, expending an asset, or accepting a constraint that Iran's planners were now incorporating into the next iteration. The old equation, American presence as automatic deterrence by reputation, had been stress-tested against an adversary that had done its homework. The generals in Washington understood the implications before the pilots had changed out of their flight suits. The rules that had governed naval power projection in the Gulf since the 1980s had not simply been challenged. They had been rewritten. On the radar screens, the new dots continued to flicker.